A falling chandelier nearly struck a child until the black maid intervened and the Mafia boss lost his composure. The grand ballroom was alive with chatter, laughter, and the clinking of champagne glasses. The evening had started like any other high-profile event at the Romano estate. Guests mingled in their finest attire, luxury oozing from every corner of the room. But as the guests took their seats and the evening continued, something unexpected happened that would turn the night upside down. High above, hanging from the ceiling in the center of the ballroom, was a magnificent chandelier, its crystals sparkling like stars. Suddenly, with a low groan and a loud snap, the chandelier started to wobble. Guests gasped and turned their heads, the fragile balance of the crystal structure becoming apparent. It swung back and forth, dangerously close to the young child sitting at the table in front of it. The child, no more than 6 years old, was unaware of the imminent danger as she laughed and played with her toy, oblivious to the disaster unfolding above her. The room fell into silence for a moment as the guests watched in frozen horror. But in that moment of chaos, Nia Carter, the black maid working at the Romano mansion, was the first to react. She dashed forward without thinking, her movements swift and determined. Without hesitation, she reached out and yanked the child out of her seat, pulling her to safety just seconds before the chandelier crashed to the floor with a deafening thud. The room erupted into panic, but Nia stood with the child safely in her arms, breathing heavily, her heart racing. The guests, some of them still in shock, began to murmur among themselves. But it was the figure standing in the corner of the room who truly felt the shift. Dominic Romano, the Mafia boss, had been observing the scene from a distance, his steely eyes cold and unblinking. He was a man who had seen everything, the power he held, the lives he controlled, and the chaos that came with it. But seeing the maid, the woman he had always seen as invisible, leap into action to protect his family, something inside him stirred. For the first time in his life, Dominic lost his composure. His mind raced as he processed what had just happened. The maid, someone who was never supposed to matter, had just saved the most important thing to him, his family. He had no words for the feeling that surged through him, but he knew one thing for sure. This would change everything. I'm sure it's not often that Dominic Romano, the most feared mafia boss in all of New York, loses his composure. But tonight, he had witnessed something he couldn't ignore. Nia Carter, the maid who had always been invisible to him, had just saved his daughter from a deadly chandelier. For a brief moment, as the chaos settled and people began to collect themselves, Dominic stood in stunned silence. His heart was racing, his mind caught in a whirl of disbelief. He wasn't sure what to do next. He had been in countless dangerous situations, but nothing had ever shaken him quite like this. He had never felt this kind of vulnerability. Nia was still standing there, holding his daughter, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she looked around the room, her face pale with the adrenaline of the moment. But it was the way she held the child that had shaken Dominic. The way she had acted instinctively, without hesitation, to protect what was most precious to him, that had caused something inside him to stir, something that he wasn't used to feeling. He was used to being the one in control, the one who made decisions, who held the power. He was used to having everyone follow his commands, without question. But here, in this moment, Nia had taken control. Nia, the maid he had dismissed countless times without a second thought. Nia, who had never been anything more than background noise in his world, had just saved his daughter's life. And Dominic didn't know what to make of it. He watched her carefully as she gently placed his daughter back into her seat, offering a soft smile to the little girl who was still shaken but safe. For a brief moment, Nia looked up, meeting his gaze across the room. She looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't lower her eyes. She didn't shrink away. She stood tall, with a quiet strength that left him speechless. The room slowly began to return to normal, but Dominic remained still, unable to take his eyes off her. His world had always been black and white, right and wrong, power and submission. He had never paid attention to the people who lived in the shadows of his mansion, the people who served him without ever asking for anything in return. They were nothing more than tools in his eyes. But now, standing in the aftermath of what had just happened, he realized that Nia was no longer just a tool. She was someone who had shown him something he hadn't seen in a long time: humanity. Dominic. A voice broke through his thoughts. It was Luca, his right-hand man, standing at his side, looking concerned. "Are you all right, boss?" Dominic blinked, shaking himself from his stupor. He took a deep breath, but his mind was still racing. "Yeah, I'm fine." He gave a small, dismissive wave, as if brushing off the impact of the moment. But he knew that wasn't true. Something inside him had shifted. "Make sure everything's handled here. I'll be in my office." Luca didn't question him. He simply nodded and moved away, his footsteps echoing through the quiet ballroom. Dominic slowly made his way to his office, his mind still spinning. He didn't know why he was so rattled by what had happened. He had seen death, destruction, and violence. He had been in life-or-death situations countless times, and yet, he had never felt like this before. He closed the door behind him and sat down at his desk, his fingers resting on the smooth surface of the wood. His mind wandered back to Nia, to the way she had looked at him. There was no fear in her eyes, no hesitation, just calm. She had acted without thinking, without caring about the consequences. That was what disturbed him the most. It wasn't that she had saved his daughter. It was that she had done it without the fear that he was used to seeing in everyone else. She had taken control, and that thought haunted him. For the first time in years, Dominic found himself questioning the very things that had always defined him: his power, his control, and the way he had always kept people at a distance. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. It had been a long night, but it was only just beginning. Dominic knew that what he was feeling wasn't something he could ignore. He needed to know more about Nia. He needed to understand why she had acted the way she had. The thought of getting answers, of finding out what drove her, consumed him. And for the first time in a long time, Dominic felt something he had never expected: curiosity. The hours that followed were a blur. Dominic had retreated into his office, his mind still racing from the chaos of the evening. The ballroom was quiet now, the guests slowly returning to their conversations, but everything felt different. Nia Carter, the maid who had once been nothing more than a shadow in his mansion, had suddenly become the center of his thoughts. He couldn't shake the image of her, standing tall, unwavering, as the chandelier swung dangerously above his daughter. The look in her eyes, the calm, fearless gaze that met his when she saved his daughter, haunted him. It wasn't like the fear he saw in most people when they were in his presence. No, Nia had shown something different. Something that made him question his own understanding of power. He stood up from his desk, pacing back and forth, running his hand through his hair. This wasn't like him. Dominic had always been in control. He never let emotions cloud his judgment. But tonight, everything had changed. He needed answers. He needed to understand why Nia had acted the way she did. Why she hadn't been afraid of him. Why she had stepped in to save his daughter, despite knowing the consequences. Dominic had always kept people at a distance. It was easier that way. When you're at the top, you don't let anyone too close. But now, the walls he had built around himself were crumbling. He wanted to know more about Nia, who she was, what drove her, and why she had done what she did. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. "Come in," he called, his voice hoarse from the long night. Lucas stepped inside, his expression cautious. "Boss, everything's under control. The guests have calmed down, and the staff is handling the cleanup." Dominic nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. "Luca, I want to speak with Nia." Luca raised an eyebrow. "Nia? The maid?" "Yes," Dominic said, his voice steady but with an edge of curiosity that even he couldn't hide. "I want her in my office." Luca hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. "Understood, boss." As Luca left to fetch Nia, Dominic sat back down at his desk. He tried to focus, but his thoughts kept drifting back to her. Nia Carter, the woman who had unexpectedly shown him a side of himself he had long forgotten. The woman who had taken control in a moment of crisis. Dominic wasn't sure what he expected from their conversation. Maybe he would finally learn something about the mysterious maid who had been working in his household for months. Maybe he would find out why she hadn't been intimidated by his presence. But whatever it was, he knew it wouldn't be a simple conversation. Nia had already proven that she wasn't like anyone else he had encountered. A few moments later, Luca returned, followed by Nia. She walked in quietly, her head slightly bowed, as she always did, but this time, there was a noticeable tension in her movements. She was clearly nervous, but she didn't let it show too much. "Nia," Dominic began, his voice softer than usual. "Come in and sit down." Nia did as she was told, carefully sitting in the chair across from his desk. She kept her eyes lowered, but Dominic could see the slight tremor in her hands. I imagine you're wondering why I asked to speak with you, Dominic continued, studying her closely. I just wanted to understand why you did what you did tonight. You saved my daughter's life. Without hesitation. What? Nia hesitated, her gaze flickering briefly to Dominic before she lowered her eyes again. I didn't think. I just saw her in danger, and I couldn't let anything happen to her. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but there was a strength in her words that Dominic couldn't ignore. I understand that, but you didn't just act on instinct, Dominic pressed. You stepped in front of me. You protected her from something I couldn't even react to in time. Nia was silent for a moment, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her uniform. I've worked for you, Mr. Romano, she said, her voice steady now. And I've seen the way you care for your family. Your daughter is, she paused, gathering her thoughts. She's everything to you. I couldn't just stand there and watch. I had to do something. Dominic was quiet for a long moment, his gaze never leaving her. He had expected some form of fear, some kind of apology, but instead, he was met with something he hadn't anticipated, honesty. The kind of honesty that didn't ask for anything in return. You're not like the others, he finally said, his voice low. Nia looked up at him then, meeting his gaze. There was no fear in her eyes, no hesitation, just calm. I don't want anything from you, Mr. Romano, she replied quietly. I just did what I thought was right. Dominic leaned back in his chair, the weight of her words settling over him. For the first time, he saw her not as just a maid, not as someone beneath him, but as someone who had acted out of pure instinct, pure humanity. You've surprised me, Nia, he said finally, his tone more reflective than before. You've made me realize something I haven't thought about in a long time. He paused, his eyes darkening slightly. Maybe it's time I start looking at things differently. Nia didn't speak, but she nodded quietly, as though understanding what he meant. There was no need for more words. For the first time, Dominic felt like he had been changed by someone other than himself. And for the first time in a long while, he wondered what would come next. I've always been a man of control, a man who didn't let anything slip through his fingers. Dominic Romano had built his empire on that very principle. The power to control, the power to dominate, to never let anyone see him as vulnerable. But here, in the quiet of his office, that control was slipping through his fingers, and the one person who had managed to expose it was Nia Carter. He couldn't understand it. For days now, he had been reflecting on the events that had unfolded in his mansion. He had never been one for self-reflection. It wasn't his style. But something about Nia, about her actions, had gotten under his skin. She wasn't supposed to matter to him. She was just another employee, another cog in the machine that kept his household running smoothly. But after the incident with the chandelier, everything had changed. She had stepped in without hesitation, without fear, and had saved his daughter. In the world Dominic inhabited, there was no room for weakness. But Nia had shown him something different, something he couldn't ignore. He had called for her again, just a few days after their conversation in his office. This time, it wasn't about saving anyone. This time, it was about understanding her. About understanding why someone like her had taken a risk for him and his family when others would have simply stepped aside. The mansion was quieter than usual, the staff going about their work, but there was an air of tension that Dominic couldn't shake. Nia had been summoned to his office, and she arrived promptly, just as she always did. She was dressed in her usual attire, a simple maid's uniform, but her posture was different this time. She wasn't slouched, wasn't trying to disappear. No, this time, she was standing taller, with more confidence. And Dominic couldn't help but notice. She stepped inside, her eyes lowering slightly as she entered, but there was no hesitation in her movement. You wanted to see me, Mr. Romano? She asked, her voice calm, steady. Dominic nodded, his gaze fixed on her. Yes, Nia. Please, have a seat. She did as she was told, sitting across from him, keeping her hands folded neatly in her lap. For a moment, they simply looked at each other in silence. Dominic was still trying to make sense of everything. You've surprised me, he said, his voice low. I never expected someone like you to act the way you did that night. You've shown me a side of you I didn't know existed. Nia's expression remained neutral, but Dominic could see the flicker of something in her eyes, curiosity, perhaps, or recognition of what he was saying. I don't expect you to understand, Mr. Romano, she replied quietly. I didn't do it for any reason other than because it was the right thing to do. Dominic leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepling in front of him. That's the thing, he said slowly. You didn't do it because it was the right thing to do. You did it because you saw something that others wouldn't have. You saw my daughter in danger, and you acted, without hesitation. What? Nia looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting slightly, as though trying to find the right words. I guess it's just instinct. I've always had that instinct to protect, to help others when they need it. I've seen enough pain in my life to know what it feels like to be helpless. I didn't want your daughter to feel that. Dominic felt a pang in his chest, something he hadn't expected. He had heard the words before, protecting others, doing what was right. But hearing them from someone like Nia, someone he had always dismissed, made them feel different. You don't understand, do you? Dominic's voice softened. People like me don't get help from people like you. I've spent my whole life keeping people at a distance, making sure no one can touch me, no one can control me. But you just did something that no one has ever done for me before. You saved my family without asking for anything in return. That doesn't happen in my world. Nia met his gaze, and this time, there was no fear in her eyes. She wasn't intimidated by him. I didn't want anything from you, Mr. Romano. I just did what felt right. If I had hesitated, if I had thought about myself, I wouldn't have been able to live with that. I'm not looking for a reward. I just did what I had to do. Dominic was silent for a long moment, his mind racing. He had built his empire on power, on control, but here was this woman, this maid, showing him something he had long buried. The ability to care, to protect, without expecting anything in return. It was a lesson he hadn't realized he needed. You've changed me, Nia, he said quietly, his voice almost inaudible. I've spent my life building walls, and you've shown me how fragile they really are. Nia didn't respond. She just sat there, her eyes steady, not waiting for anything from him. Dominic took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Thank you, he said, his voice sincere for the first time in a long while. You've done more for me than anyone else ever has. Nia nodded, her expression softening, but she didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The connection between them was no longer about power or fear. It was about something deeper, something human. And for the first time, Dominic didn't feel the need to control it. I'm sure Dominic Romano had always believed that nothing could surprise him. For years, he had walked through life with the certainty that he was in control, that his empire, built on fear and power, was untouchable. But that night, when Nia Carter had saved his daughter, something shifted inside him. The walls he had built around himself began to crack, and for the first time, he found himself questioning everything he had known. The days that followed were filled with a strange tension. Dominic couldn't stop thinking about Nia. He tried to focus on the work that demanded his attention, but her image kept coming back to him. The way she had looked at him that night, standing strong and unafraid. The way she had acted without thinking about the consequences. It was as if she had unlocked something in him that he didn't even know was there. He had always kept his distance from people, never letting anyone get close enough to make a real impact on his life. But Nia was different. She had shown him a side of himself that he had buried for years. He found himself wondering if he had been wrong all along, about the way he viewed people, about the way he treated them, and about the role he had played in their lives. One evening, as Dominic sat in his office, he found himself staring at the door, waiting. He wasn't sure what he was waiting for, but the feeling gnawed at him, an urgency that he couldn't shake. He wanted to see Nia again. He needed to understand her more. He had never felt this kind of pull before, this curiosity that had grown into something stronger. It wasn't just about her saving his daughter anymore. It was about her, about the person she was, the way she had acted without fear, without asking for anything in return. She had done what others wouldn't have done, and Dominic found himself fascinated by it. The knock on the door startled him, breaking his thoughts. "Come in," he called, his voice calm, but there was a tension in it that he couldn't hide. Nia entered, her presence steady and composed, just as it had been the last time they spoke. She looked at him briefly before lowering her eyes, but there was no fear in her gaze. It was something else, something he had never seen in her before. Trust, maybe? Or perhaps an understanding. He gestured for her to sit, his fingers resting on the desk in front of him. "Nia," he began, his voice soft but firm. "Thank you for what you did. You've given me a lot to think about." Nia looked up, meeting his eyes. This time, and there was no hesitation. "I told you before, Mr. Romano, I did it because it was the right thing to do, she said quietly. I didn't expect anything in return. Dominic nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. You didn't expect anything, he repeated, almost to himself. But you did it anyway. There was a long silence between them, the weight of his words hanging in the air. For the first time, Dominic wasn't sure what to say. He had always been the one who made the decisions, who controlled everything around him. But with Nia, it felt different. She wasn't asking for anything from him, yet she had changed something inside him, something he couldn't quite put into words. I don't understand, Dominic said after a moment. I don't understand why you would act like that. You risked everything for someone like me. For my family. Nia's gaze softened, and she leaned forward slightly, as if trying to make him understand. It wasn't about you, Mr. Romano, she said. It was about doing what was right. About protecting someone who needed it. Dominic felt a flicker of something in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. It was the feeling of vulnerability. The feeling of someone else caring about something that mattered to him. He cleared his throat, trying to shake off the sensation. You're not like anyone I've ever known, he said, his voice rough. You didn't let fear stop you. You didn't let anything stop you from doing what you thought was right. Nia sat back in her chair, her hands resting on her lap. I've learned not to let fear control me, Mr. Romano. Fear can paralyze you. It can keep you from doing what you know is right. I didn't have time to be afraid. All I knew was that I had to act. Dominic's gaze softened as he looked at her. For the first time, he saw her not just as an employee, but as someone who had made a choice that had cost her nothing but had given him everything. You've taught me something, Dominic said, his voice quiet. Something I didn't know I needed to learn. Nia didn't speak, but she nodded slightly, as though she understood exactly what he meant. I've spent my life building walls, making sure no one gets too close, Dominic continued. But maybe I've been wrong. Nia looked at him, and for the first time, Dominic saw something in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. It wasn't pity, or fear, or even understanding. It was something else. Something that made him feel more vulnerable than he had ever felt. She wasn't judging him. She wasn't waiting for him to make a decision. She was simply there. You've changed me, Nia, Dominic said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. You've made me see that there's more to life than power. More than control. The silence in the room stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful. For the first time in a long time, Dominic didn't feel like he had to hold everything together. He didn't feel like he had to be the one in charge. He felt human, and that, more than anything, was something he wasn't sure he was ready for. But it was something he knew he needed to explore. I had always believed that power was the only thing that mattered. In my world, control was everything. Dominic Romano, the name that struck fear into the hearts of so many, had built an empire on that belief. But in the days following Nia's act of courage, something inside me had begun to unravel. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The walls I had so carefully constructed around myself were starting to crack, and Nia Carter, the maid I had once dismissed, was at the center of it. She had changed everything. I kept thinking about that night, about the way she had acted without fear, without hesitation. And then, I found myself questioning the foundation of everything I had built. I had always told myself that vulnerability was a weakness, that showing emotion would only make me susceptible. But Nia, she had shown me that there was strength in vulnerability, that sometimes doing the right thing meant risking it all. It was a lesson I didn't know I needed to learn. It was an uncomfortable realization, one I hadn't been prepared for. The more I thought about Nia, the more I realized that I had been living my life with blinders on. I had been so focused on control and power that I had lost sight of what really mattered. And now, here I was, standing on the edge of something I didn't understand. I had to see her again. I needed answers. I needed to understand why she had acted the way she did. I couldn't let it go. The days passed, and I found myself searching for excuses to see her, to speak with her. My usual meetings, my business dealings, they all seemed insignificant compared to the questions that gnawed at me. And so, I summoned her again. This time, there was no chaos, no threat to my family. It was just me and her, in my office, trying to make sense of what had happened. The door opened, and Nia stepped inside. She looked the same as always, quiet, composed, her head slightly bowed in that way she had always done when addressing me. But today, there was something different about her. It wasn't fear. It wasn't submission. It was something else. I had never seen her this way before. She was no longer a shadow in the background, but a presence. You wanted to see me, Mr. Romano? Her voice was steady, polite, but there was a firmness to it now. I nodded, gesturing for her to sit. She did so without hesitation, her eyes meeting mine for a brief moment before she lowered them again. Nia, I began, trying to find the right words. I've been thinking a lot about what happened that night. About you. She didn't respond, but I could see the curiosity in her eyes. She was waiting for me to continue. You did something that night, something that caught me off guard. I didn't expect it, and I don't think I fully understand it yet. Why did you act like that? Why did you risk everything for my family? She was silent for a long moment, her fingers nervously fiddling with the edge of her sleeve. I could see the wheels turning in her head, and for a brief moment, I wondered if she would even answer. But when she finally spoke, her voice was calm, almost serene. I didn't think about it, Mr. Romano. I just saw your daughter in danger, and I couldn't let anything happen to her. There was a softness in her tone that I hadn't expected. It was as if she was speaking from a place of deep conviction. But why? I pressed, trying to understand. You could have stayed back. You could have let others handle it. Why did you step in? She looked up at me then, and this time, there was no hesitation. Her gaze was steady, unflinching. Because it was the right thing to do. Because no one else was going to do it. I leaned back in my chair, processing her words. There was no fear in her eyes. No calculation. Just honesty. The kind of honesty I hadn't seen in years. I was used to people lying to me, to bending the truth for their own gain. But Nia, she wasn't like that. She didn't ask for anything in return. She didn't expect anything from me. She had simply acted because it was the right thing to do. And in that moment, I realized something. You're different from everyone I've ever known, I said, my voice softer than I intended. Most people would have hesitated. They would have worried about themselves first. But not you. You acted without thinking, without caring about the consequences. You didn't even think about what I might do. She didn't say anything, but I could see a faint smile tug at the corner of her lips. I've learned that fear only holds you back, she said quietly. It stops you from doing the things you know are right. I didn't have time to be afraid, Mr. Romano. I just did what I had to do. I sat there, staring at her, trying to comprehend the weight of her words. For the first time in my life, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I had been wrong about everything. I had spent my entire life building walls around myself, keeping people at a distance, never letting anyone in. I had believed that power was the only thing that mattered, that control was the key to survival. But Nia had shown me that there was more to life than power. There was more to life than control. There was something deeper, something that had been buried inside me for far too long. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I was ready to face it. I had always believed that power was everything, that control was the key to survival in the world I had created. But now, sitting in my office, watching Nia Carter, the woman who had shattered every assumption I had about myself and the world around me, I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew. She had saved my daughter. No hesitation, no fear. And she had done it because it was the right thing to do. That was the most unsettling part. In my world, everyone had an agenda. People acted with an eye on the consequences, always thinking about how their actions could benefit them. But Nia had no such calculations. She simply acted, and it had changed everything. It had shaken something deep inside me, something I had buried for years, maybe my humanity. I leaned back in my chair, my fingers pressing into the polished wood of the desk, trying to gather my thoughts. You've done something I never thought possible, I said, my voice steady, though my mind was a whirlwind. Nia remained silent, her eyes watching me carefully. You've made me see something, I continued. Something I didn't even know I had lost. She didn't speak, but her expression softened, and for a moment, I felt as if she was waiting for me to come to terms with it on my own. The silence in the room felt heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as if she was giving me the space to figure it out. Finally, I broke the silence. I've spent my life building an empire, I said, my voice quieter now, almost as if I were talking to myself. But in all that time, I never once thought about the people who helped me build it. The ones who made it all possible. The ones who serve in the background, unnoticed. I've taken them all for granted. Nia didn't say anything, but I could see the understanding in her eyes. She wasn't surprised by my admission. She knew, as anyone in my world did, that power often came at the expense of others. I've never been someone who lets people get close, I continued. I thought I had to be strong, that I couldn't show weakness, couldn't let anyone see who I really was. But you, I hesitated, unsure of how to express what I was feeling. You've shown me that strength doesn't have to come from being cold and unfeeling. Maybe it comes from being able to care, to protect. Nia's gaze didn't waver, and for the first time, I saw something in her eyes that I hadn't noticed before, a quiet strength, a calm acceptance. I did what anyone would have done, she said softly, her voice unwavering. It wasn't about you. It was about doing what was right. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had always believed that people acted out of self-interest, that everyone had an agenda. But Nia, she didn't act for gain. She didn't act for any reason other than what was right. And that was something I had never fully understood. I stood up from my desk, my thoughts swirling, and walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. I've spent so long protecting myself, building walls around me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But now, I feel like those walls are coming down, and I don't know what to do with it. Nia stood silently behind me, waiting for me to find the words. I've always thought that if I showed any weakness, if I let anyone get too close, I would lose control, I continued, turning to face her. But what you've shown me is that maybe control isn't the answer. Maybe letting go of it, just a little bit, is what makes us stronger. The silence between us grew, and I could feel the weight of my own words sinking in. I had always been a man of power, of control. But in this moment, I wasn't sure if that was enough anymore. I wasn't sure if that was all I needed. You've changed me, Nia, I said, my voice quieter now, almost hesitant. I don't know how yet, but you've made me see that there's more to life than power, more than control, and I think I need to learn what that is. Nia didn't respond immediately, but I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, something that told me she understood. She didn't need to say anything. She had already said everything with her actions. I could feel my world shifting around me. The walls I had spent my entire life building were coming down, piece by piece, and in their place, something else was emerging. Something I hadn't expected, something I hadn't been ready for. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure where that would take me. But I knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened next, I wouldn't face it alone. Not anymore. I had always prided myself on my ability to control everything around me. My world was one of precision, of power that could not be shaken. But now, sitting in my office, I felt the ground beneath me shifting, as if the foundation of everything I had built was slowly eroding. Nia Carter had done something I hadn't expected. She had stepped into my life, into my world, and altered its course without even trying. It wasn't just that she had saved my daughter. It was how she had done it. The way she had acted without hesitation, without thinking about what it might cost her. She had done what was right, and in doing so, she had made me confront parts of myself that I had long buried. The walls I had built around my heart, around my soul, were coming down. I had spent my entire life creating an image, a persona of strength and invulnerability. But now, as I sat there, I realized that those walls had kept more than just my enemies out. They had kept out everything that had ever truly mattered. I couldn't stop thinking about her. Nia had changed me, and I knew it. There was no denying it. But the question remained, what now? What did I do with this new reality? The days that followed felt strange, like I was walking through a fog. I went about my business as usual, but my mind kept drifting back to Nia. She had been a part of my life for months now, but it was only in the aftermath of that night that I began to truly see her. Not as a maid, not as someone who was there to serve me, but as a person who had more strength and courage than I had given her credit for. And it disturbed me. It made me uncomfortable. The truth was, I didn't know how to handle this. I didn't know how to handle the fact that I had been wrong all along. Nia wasn't just a background figure in my life. She wasn't just someone who disappeared into the shadows, silently doing her job. She was someone who had acted with more integrity and conviction than I had ever shown in my life. And now, she had my full attention. I knew I needed to talk to her again. But this time, it would be different. I wasn't just asking questions out of curiosity anymore. I needed to understand her. I needed to know what drove her, what made her tick. Why had she done what she had done? Why had she stepped into the path of danger without a second thought? As I called for her, I found myself growing more anxious. This was uncharted territory for me. I had always been the one in control. But now, I was the one who felt uncertain, unsure of what to expect. The door opened, and Nia entered, her presence calm but strong, as it always was. She met my gaze without hesitation this time, and for a moment, I felt the weight of her quiet confidence. She was no longer the timid maid I had once seen her as. She was someone entirely different now. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Romano?" she asked, her voice as steady as ever. I nodded, motioning for her to sit. She did so, and for a long moment, there was silence between us. I could feel the tension in the air. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to say, but I knew I couldn't just let this moment slip away without saying something. "Nia," I began, my voice softer than I had intended. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened that night. What you did." She didn't respond immediately, but her eyes never left mine. "I've been trying to understand why you acted the way you did. Why you stepped in without thinking about yourself, without worrying about the consequences." She shifted in her seat slightly, but didn't speak. It was as though she was waiting for me to finish. "I've spent my life controlling everything around me," I continued, feeling my voice grow more reflective. "I've built walls around myself, around my heart, because I thought that's what was necessary to survive. But you—" I paused, trying to find the right words. "You've shown me something I never expected. You've shown me that strength doesn't come from building walls. It comes from doing what's right, even when it's hard." Nia looked down at her hands for a moment, and then she finally spoke, her voice low but clear. "I didn't think about it, Mr. Romano. I just did what felt right." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had been so focused on control, on power, that I had forgotten what it meant to act with integrity. "You did what felt right," I echoed, feeling the weight of the realization. "And in doing so, you've taught me more than anyone ever could." There was a long silence between us, but it was no longer uncomfortable. It felt right, like we were both finally understanding each other, even without words. "I've spent so much of my life hiding behind this image," I said, my voice softer now. "But I see now that it was a lie. I've been afraid of showing who I really am, afraid of being vulnerable. But what you did that night, what you showed me, has made me realize that maybe, just maybe, I don't have to be afraid anymore." Nia's gaze softened, and for the first time, I saw something like warmth in her eyes. It wasn't pity or sympathy, it was understanding. "You don't have to be afraid, Mr. Romano," she said quietly. "Sometimes the greatest strength comes from allowing yourself to be human." Her words lingered in the air, and I found myself at a loss for what to say. I had spent my entire life building an empire, protecting it with everything I had. But in that moment, I realized that what I had built wasn't as important as the connections we make with others, the way we care for them. Nia had shown me that. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had learned something that mattered more than power. Something that would stay with me long after the business meetings and the deals. It was a lesson in humanity, and it had come from the most unexpected place. I had spent my life believing that strength came from control, that if I kept everything in my grasp, if I could hold the reins tightly enough, I would never be caught off guard, never be exposed. But here I was, weeks after the incident with the chandelier, feeling as though the very foundation of my existence had been upended. Nia Carter had done something I had never imagined possible. She had stepped into my world, acted without fear, and changed everything. For the first time, I was forced to confront the idea that there was more to life than just power, more to being a man than just being in charge. As much as I hated to admit it, Nia had shown me that. The walls I had so carefully built around myself were starting to crumble, and I couldn't stop it. I wasn't sure I wanted to. Every time I thought about her, I was struck by how little I had truly known about the people who lived in the world I controlled. Nia, a maid, a servant in my house, had more courage, more integrity, than anyone I had ever met. And yet, she was someone I had barely acknowledged until that fateful night. I found myself thinking about that moment more and more, the way she had acted, without hesitation, without worrying about what it might cost her. She had only acted because it was the right thing to do, and that thought consumed me. It unsettled me in a way I couldn't describe. But I wasn't sure if I wanted to ignore it anymore. I called for her again. This time, there was no chaos, no immediate danger. It was just me and her, sitting across from each other. I had spent so long avoiding the questions, avoiding the feelings, but now, I found myself asking them. Nia, I said when she entered my office, her presence as composed as always. I've been thinking about you, about what you did, and about what it's made me realize. She stood there for a moment, her eyes steady on me, waiting for me to continue. I've never been good at accepting vulnerability, I admitted, the words feeling strange coming from my mouth. I've spent my life building walls around me. I've thought that if I kept everything in control, if I never let anyone in, I would be safe. But what you did, I paused, trying to find the right words. You showed me that maybe I've been wrong, that maybe I've been afraid of the wrong things. Nia was silent for a moment, her gaze never leaving mine. She had always been quiet, reserved, but there was a quiet strength in her now that I couldn't ignore. I didn't do it for you, Mr. Romano, she said softly, her voice steady. I did it because it was the right thing to do, because I couldn't just stand by and watch someone be hurt. I nodded, her words resonating with me in a way I didn't fully understand. But it's more than that, I said, my voice quieter now. It's not just about what you did that night. It's about what it means. Nia didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, her hands clasped in front of her, waiting. It means, I continued, that there's more to life than control. That being in charge isn't everything. It means that maybe, just maybe, I've been holding on to the wrong things for too long. The room fell into silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as if I had just admitted something I had been avoiding for far too long. You've changed the way I see the world, I said, almost in disbelief at my own words. And I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how to move forward with all of this. Nia finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. You don't have to do anything, Mr. Romano. You don't have to change because of me. I didn't do it for recognition or for praise. I did it because it was the right thing to do. It's that simple. I looked at her then, really looked at her, for the first time. She wasn't just the maid. She wasn't just someone who served me. She was someone who had integrity, someone who had acted out of a sense of what was right, not out of obligation, not out of fear. And that realization shook me more than anything. You've always been more than I ever gave you credit for, I said, my voice filled with an emotion I wasn't sure I could name. And now I see that. I see you. Nia didn't react to the words, but I could see something shift in her. It wasn't pride, but something close to it, an acknowledgement, maybe, of what I was finally recognizing. I know it's not easy, I said after a moment, feeling the weight of the conversation settle in. I know that everything I've built has been based on control and fear, but I'm not sure that's what I want anymore. I'm not sure that's the life I want to lead. Nia didn't answer immediately, but she nodded, as if understanding something that I couldn't yet put into words. It's never easy to change, Mr. Romano, she said, her voice calm. But sometimes it's necessary. And I think you're ready for it. Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that felt heavy in the room. I didn't know where this would take me, this new path I seemed to be walking. I didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to control it. I didn't feel the need to fight against it. Nia had shown me something I hadn't realized I needed to see. And now, I had to learn how to live with that knowledge. How to move forward, not as the man I had been, but as the man I could become. I sat in the silence of my office, the weight of everything that had happened pressing on my chest. Nia's words, her actions, everything about that night. It had all been a wake-up call, and yet I still wasn't sure what to do with it. I had spent so much of my life trying to stay ahead, to be the one in control, that the idea of letting go, of truly letting go, felt like stepping into a void. I had always believed that in this world, control was the only thing that mattered. Without it, I thought, everything would fall apart. But now, after everything, after what Nia had shown me, I wasn't so sure anymore. The realization hit me slowly, like a wave pulling at my feet before it fully broke over me. Nia had saved my daughter that night, not because she was ordered to, not because it would benefit her in any way, but because it was the right thing to do. And that simple act of courage had changed everything for me. I had built an empire on power, on fear, but for the first time, I could see that there was more to life than that. The walls I had carefully constructed around myself were slowly crumbling, and in their place, something new was emerging. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I still felt the old urge to control, to keep everything in line. But now, I had to learn how to balance that with what Nia had shown me. How to live with vulnerability, how to care without fear. And that was a harder lesson than anything I had ever faced. As the days passed, I began to notice small changes in myself. I was less rigid in my approach to things. I found myself listening more, not just to my associates, but to the people around me. People like Nia, who had always been in the background, who had never been seen or heard by me. I had taken them all for granted. But now, I found myself paying attention. I called Nia to my office again. It wasn't for any particular reason, just a need to talk, to hear her voice again. She had become a constant in my thoughts, and I wasn't sure what that meant. She entered quietly, as always, but this time, there was something different about her. She wasn't as reserved as before. There was a quiet confidence in her step, in the way she held herself. I wondered if she had noticed the changes in me too. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Romano?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. I looked up at her, trying to find the words. "Yes, Nia," I began, trying to sound composed, though I knew she could see right through me. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about everything that's changed." She nodded, her expression unreadable, but her eyes were softer, more understanding than they had been before. "What you did that night, it wasn't just about saving my daughter," I said slowly. "It was more than that. It's changed everything, and I don't know if I'm ready for it. But I can't ignore it anymore. I don't know what to do with the way I'm feeling." Nia remained silent for a moment, her gaze steady, as if she was waiting for me to continue. "You've made me see things differently," I said, my voice quieter now. "I've spent so much of my life focused on power, on control, that I never stopped to think about what really matters. What's worth fighting for? What's worth caring about?" She didn't say anything at first, but then she spoke softly, as if she was speaking from a place of deep understanding. "It's not easy to change, Mr. Romano," she said, "but sometimes it's necessary. And I think you're on the right path." Her words, simple as they were, carried weight. I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a clarity that I hadn't known in years. It wasn't a perfect understanding. It wasn't an immediate solution to everything, but it was a start. "I don't know where this will lead," I said, my voice filled with uncertainty, but also with something else, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. Hope. "But I know I can't go back to the way things were. Not after everything you've shown me." Nia didn't respond, but there was a softness in her gaze, something that told me she understood. She didn't need to say anything more. She had already said everything with her actions. In that moment, I realized that I didn't have all the answers, and I didn't have to. For the first time in my life, I didn't need to control everything. I didn't need to have all the power. What mattered now was learning how to be human again, how to connect with the people around me, not as someone who owned them, but as someone who truly saw them. I looked at Nia one last time, the weight of everything she had taught me settling deep within me. "Thank you, Nia," I said quietly. "For everything." She nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips, and in that moment, I knew that the path I was on, though uncertain, was the right one. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to walk it. I had spent most of my life avoiding the truth, thinking that the only way to survive in the world I had built was to keep everything tightly under control. But now, everything felt different. The walls I had so carefully constructed were beginning to crumble, and I wasn't sure how to handle the vulnerability that came with it. Nia Carter had changed something inside me, something I hadn't even realized was missing. It wasn't just the way she had saved my daughter, or the way she had acted without hesitation. It was the way she had made me face the truth about myself. I wasn't the man I thought I was, and neither was she the person I had assumed she was. I couldn't stop thinking about the conversation we had shared in my office. I had never been one to allow anyone to get close to me, to let them see behind the carefully constructed mask I wore every day. But in the space between us, there was no need for pretense. I felt myself becoming more and more aware of who I truly was, and who Nia truly was as well. Her presence, quiet and strong, lingered in the air, and I found myself wanting to learn more about her. She had shown me something that no one else had ever been able to show me: the value of kindness, the power of doing what was right without expecting anything in return. I hadn't realized how much I had been craving that kind of simplicity, that kind of clarity. The next time I saw Nia, I knew I had to make a change. I had to admit to myself that I wasn't the same man I had been. I wasn't the same person who had built an empire based on fear, control, and power. I had to learn to let go. And the first step in that process was facing the person who had made it all possible, Nia. I called for her to come to my office, the familiar tension in the air as I waited for her arrival. I wasn't sure how this conversation would go, or what I was even going to say, but I knew I needed to speak with her again. She had made a bigger impact on me than anyone ever had, and I owed her more than just gratitude. I owed her an understanding of the way I had been, and a recognition of the change she had inspired in me. When Nia walked in, I noticed right away that she had changed too. There was a new strength in her, something that hadn't been there before. She stood a little taller, her shoulders more squared, and there was a quiet confidence about her that hadn't existed before. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was someone who had changed me. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Romano?" she asked, her voice calm but steady, with no hint of fear. I could see the slight shift in her expression, the acknowledgement that this conversation would be different. "Yes, Nia. Please, sit down," I said, motioning to the chair across from my desk. She obeyed, her gaze meeting mine, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was thick with everything that had happened, and I wasn't sure where to begin. But I had to start somewhere. "I've been thinking a lot," I began, my voice more subdued than I had intended. "About everything. About the way I've lived my life. About the choices I've made." Nia didn't respond, but I could see the faintest nod of her head, as if she understood. "I've spent so much of my life building walls," I continued, "believing that power and control were the only things that mattered. But you've shown me that there's more to life than that. More to being a person than just being in charge." I paused, feeling the weight of my own words settle on me. "I don't know how to explain it, but you've made me see that I've been wrong all this time. I've been so focused on keeping control, on keeping everything in line, that I never stopped to think about the people around me. I never stopped to think about what really matters." I watched her carefully, waiting for some sign, some reaction. But Nia remained still, her expression calm and patient. "You did something for me that no one else has ever done," I said, my voice low. "You showed me the value of doing what's right, of acting without hesitation. You showed me that it's not just about what I can control, but about what I choose to protect." Nia finally spoke, her voice soft but firm. "It wasn't about you, Mr. Romano," she said quietly. "It was about doing what I thought was right. It's what I've always tried to do. I couldn't just stand there and do nothing." Her words resonated deeply with me. "I know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know it wasn't about me, but I can't help but feel like it was. You've changed something inside me. You've made me see the world differently, and I can't ignore that anymore." Nia looked at me for a long moment, and I could see the understanding in her eyes. It wasn't just sympathy. It wasn't pity. It was a quiet acknowledgement of what had transpired between us. "I'm not the same person I was before," I continued. "I know that now, and I don't think I want to go back to that. But I also know that I don't have all the answers. I don't know what happens next, but I do know that I want to find out." Nia didn't respond, but there was a soft smile on her face, and I could tell that she understood. She didn't need to say anything else. The moment between us wasn't about words. It was about something deeper, an understanding, a recognition of change. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I wasn't afraid of letting go. And I knew that with Nia by my side, I didn't have to face it alone. I sat in the quiet of my office, the weight of the silence pressing down on me as I tried to gather my thoughts. Nia's words had lingered in my mind since our last conversation, like a shadow I couldn't shake. She had shown me something I hadn't known I was missing, a way of seeing the world, a way of acting, that was beyond the confines of control and power. And it was unsettling. I had spent years building a life based on the idea that strength came from control. But now, every time I thought about Nia, every time I remembered that night, I was forced to face the truth. I had been wrong. For so long, I had believed that power meant never showing vulnerability, never letting anyone get too close. But Nia had changed all of that. She had stepped into my life, not because she wanted something from me, but because it was simply the right thing to do. And in doing so, she had made me question everything I thought I knew about myself and the world around me. I wasn't sure what to make of this shift inside me. I had always been the one who made the decisions, the one who controlled every aspect of my life and business. But now, I wasn't so sure anymore. What if there was more to life than power? What if there was something greater, something worth striving for that didn't require me to dominate or control. I didn't have the answers, but I knew that I couldn't keep living the way I had before. I needed to change, and I knew that the path ahead wasn't going to be easy. It would take time. It would take effort. And it would take something I had spent my entire life avoiding. Trust. I had never trusted anyone. Not in the way I was beginning to realize I needed to. I had built my walls high, convinced that if I let anyone in, they would tear me apart. But now, as I sat there, I wondered if the walls I had built were the very things that had kept me from living the life I truly wanted. The life I truly needed. My thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. Nia had become a part of my daily thoughts, and now, as I looked at the door, I realized how much I had been waiting for this moment. The moment when I would truly face the change that had been set in motion. "Come in," I called, my voice steady but filled with an emotion I couldn't hide. The door opened, and Nia stepped inside. Her presence was as calm as ever, but there was something different about her now. It wasn't just the way she carried herself, it was the way I saw her now. I wasn't seeing her as just the maid anymore. I was seeing her as someone who had shown me a new way of living, a new way of being. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Romano?" Her voice was as calm and polite as always, but there was a quiet strength behind it now that hadn't been there before. I looked up at her, my mind racing. This was the moment where everything could change, where I could decide whether or not I was willing to let go of the control I had clung to for so long. "Yes, Nia," I began, my voice quieter than usual. "I've been thinking a lot about everything." She didn't speak, just waited for me to continue. "I've spent my life thinking I needed to control everything around me, that if I didn't, I'd lose it all. But you—" I stopped, unsure of how to put it into words. "You've made me realize that maybe, just maybe, I've been wrong." Nia's gaze softened, but she didn't say anything. She just stood there, quietly waiting, as if giving me the space to figure it out on my own. "You didn't just save my daughter that night," I continued, my voice a little stronger now. "You saved me from something I didn't even know I was trapped in. A life built on fear. Fear of letting go. Fear of being vulnerable. But now, I realize that I don't have to live that way anymore." There was a long pause before Nia spoke again, her voice gentle, but firm. "It's not easy, Mr. Romano. Change never is. But it's necessary. Sometimes, you have to let go in order to move forward." Her words felt like a truth I had been denying for far too long. I had always believed that strength came from holding on tight, from keeping everything in my grasp. But now, I saw that true strength might come from the ability to let go, from allowing myself to trust, to care, and to not fear the vulnerability that came with it. "I've spent so long afraid of what would happen if I let go," I said softly. "Afraid of being weak. But now, I don't know if I can keep living like that. I don't know if I want it anymore." Nia nodded, as though she understood exactly what I meant. "You don't have to be afraid anymore, Mr. Romano," she said quietly. "Sometimes, letting go is the strongest thing you can do." I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. She wasn't just a maid, a servant in my house. She was someone who had shown me something that no one else ever had. The power of kindness, the strength of vulnerability. And in that moment, I realized that I wasn't just changing my views on power. I was changing my views on life. "Thank you, Nia," I said, my voice filled with gratitude. "For everything." She smiled softly, but there was no need for any more words. The connection between us didn't need any further explanation. It was understood. And for the first time, I felt like I was ready to embrace the future, whatever it may bring. I had spent so many years living in the confines of my own making, constantly controlling every situation, keeping people at arm's length, afraid that any moment of weakness would unravel the empire I had built. But now, sitting across from Nia, I could feel the truth of it all settling in. The walls I had spent my life building, the barriers I had erected to keep the world at bay, were no longer keeping me safe. They were keeping me from something much more important. I had been afraid to live fully, to experience vulnerability, to truly connect with others in a way that wasn't transactional. I had thought that power, fear, and control were the only things that could guarantee survival. But Nia had shown me the power of doing what was right, even when there was nothing to gain. It wasn't just about saving my daughter that night. It was about showing me that there was strength in kindness, in selflessness, in putting others before oneself. I had been wrong. And now, for the first time, I was beginning to understand what it truly meant to live. As I sat there with her, I realized that everything had changed. The way I viewed the world, the way I viewed myself, and the way I viewed those around me. It was all shifting. I wasn't the same person I had been just weeks ago. I had been changed, in ways I hadn't expected, by the simplest of actions, the choice to act in the face of danger without hesitation. I wasn't sure what this change meant for me, or what would happen next, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I wasn't afraid to let go of control, to trust that things would work out on their own. There was a sense of peace that had started to settle in me, something I had never experienced before. For once, I didn't feel like I had to control everything. I didn't need to hold on to power so tightly. I could let go, and it was okay. I looked at Nia again, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw her not as someone beneath me, not as a servant, but as an equal. She had done something no one else had been able to do. She had shown me a different way to live. A better way. Thank you, I said, the words feeling heavier than they had ever felt before. For showing me this. For showing me that there's more to life than control. More to it than power. Nia smiled softly, but there was no pride in it. It wasn't a smile of someone who had won or conquered. It was a smile of understanding, of quiet acknowledgement. You did it yourself, Mr. Romano, she replied quietly. I just showed you what was already inside you. I was silent for a moment, letting her words sink in. She was right. She hadn't just changed me with her actions. She had opened a door inside of me that had been shut for far too long. I hadn't been living, not truly. I had been surviving. But now, I could finally feel the difference. I could finally feel what it was like to be alive, to experience life without fear of losing control. And for the first time, I realized that I didn't need to hold on so tight. I didn't need to be afraid. I had spent so long convincing myself that power was the only way forward, the only way to ensure my survival. But Nia had shown me that there was another way. A way that didn't rely on fear. A way that didn't require me to be something I wasn't. A way that allowed me to be human again. I looked at Nia, and for the first time, I saw her as more than just someone who worked for me. I saw her as someone who had changed my life. Someone who had given me something I had lost. I've been so focused on control, on keeping everything in line, I said softly, my voice filled with new understanding. But I see now that it's not the answer. I've been afraid to let go, to trust others, but I can see now that the real strength lies in letting go, in trusting, in being vulnerable. Nia nodded, a soft, knowing smile on her face. It's not easy, but it's worth it, she said. The most important things in life don't come from control. They come from the heart. I was quiet for a moment, reflecting on what she had said. I knew she was right. It wasn't easy. Change never was. But it was necessary. And for the first time, I felt ready to face it. I had spent my entire life running from vulnerability, from the idea that I needed to open myself up to others. But now, sitting here with Nia, I understood that it wasn't a weakness. It was the only path forward. It was the only way to truly live. Thank you, I said again, my voice thick with emotion. I don't think I'll ever be able to repay you for this. Nia's smile was gentle, kind. You don't need to, she said quietly. You've already done the hardest part. You've opened your heart. And in that moment, I knew she was right. I had opened my heart, and for the first time, I felt like I could finally breathe. The weight that had been on me for so long, the fear, the control, it was lifting. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I was ready to face it, no matter what it brought. And I wouldn't face it alone.